This is episode 259 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, considering that we are here recording the Monday before Christmas, there is a lot going on in the world. And a lot of it's it's going to raise some questions and hackles, I think. It's challenging times here.
Yes, there are huge challenging times, and really look forward to exploring some of these issues that are really facing us in the world and certainly in New Mexico.
Considering that for the better part of 2020, the main issue we've all been dealing with is COVID-19. The fact that there is a new strain of the coronavirus that seems to be circulating throughout the United Kingdom, it's very much cause for concern. Now, doctor's warning, we are not doctors or medical professionals. We are reading articles and exploring information on this issue, but there are a lot of concerns that I think people rightly would have about a new, potentially more transmittable version of the coronavirus. And Dr. Scott Gottlieb has said in a CNBC interview that this new strain is believed to be more than 70% more transmissible than existing variants of the vaccine, the virus. Sorry, two V words. Now, in terms of the vaccine itself, the vaccine that we have, he believes would be effective at preventing people from getting both versions of COVID-19. But this has just this new virus version has led to more than 24 countries, I believe all European, but countries have imposed travel bans on the UK over the last few days. Some of them, including France, banned both travel and freight to and from United Kingdom, leading to possible food shortages in Britain ahead of the Christmas holiday. So this is a very serious issue. And the stock market started out way down and pared its losses. But certainly this is another layer of volatility, questions about economic policy, questions about the virus itself. Now, can people who have already had COVID-19 get this new strand? A lot of very important concerns about what's going on with regards to this new version of the virus.
Yeah, you're hitting on it, and there's three big questions. One, how easily is it transmitted? But that in it is in a vacuum, neither here nor there. The thing is if viruses mutate, if it's more easily transmitted but not as dangerous as a virus, that could actually be a very good thing. By the same token, if it's more easily transmitted and just as dangerous, if not more dangerous than the existing virus, that could be a really, really bad thing for the world and any place where it is. And then the issue about, will the vaccine work? Now, the vaccine has to do two things to work. It has to be effective against the virus as it exists in the population at that time. And two, are people going to take it? There's these two competing forces, and I talked about it a little bit over the last couple of weeks, is that it's the supply and demand thing. Right now, there's definitely more demand for the vaccine than there is supply in many places. But given the fact that, some issues are starting to come up with the vaccine and there's certain populations that are very hesitant to do it, that's the other thing. So, man, we are... just when you think that, okay, things are looking up, the path to having the COVID be less part of our life is clear and straightforward. We have these two developments, both on the vaccine side as well as on this new, and you just have to pay attention. And then we're back to the same questions that we've been having for weeks and months, and hopefully, these don't turn into years. Is are the measures that are being used to quote unquote fight the spread of the virus that have to this point been very ineffective?
Mm-hmm.
Are they just destroying our economy and hurting people worse than just what the spread of the virus would be absent some of these draconian measures? So these things are all in play, and it's all important. And, it's playing for keeps right now. But certainly, I don't think there's more clarity than there was a month ago, like I expected, to be honest. There's less.
Yeah, just a few additional notes. And again, this is primarily from a CNBC article. Dr. Scott Gottlieb says new UK COVID strain will not slip past our vaccines very easily. That is the headline of the CNBC story.
Hopefully, the vaccine read that press release and is
Yes,
taking, and I won't say I hope he's right. It's
right.
one of those, but that's a probabilistic statement he's
It's
making.
like a NFL team and their defensive line, and the virus is a running back trying to slip through that line, and hopefully they are good tacklers, and hopefully that virus does not slip through. But a couple of additional points. Uh, UK has British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has implemented strict lockdowns in London and large parts of southern England in response to the number of infections going on over there. Gottlieb said of the new virus, it doesn't seem to have mutated the surface proteins of the virus in a way that could slip past our vaccines or prior immunity. In fact, we don't think that's the case. So that's good news. In another bit of good news, we now have two weapons in the fight against COVID 19 as the Moderna version of the vaccine in the United States was approved on Friday by the Food and Drug Administration. So, if just for the simple fact that you have two major factories, if you will, the supply chain has doubled in size and scope in terms of getting vaccines out the door to hopefully get people immune and get life back to as much normalcy as possible as we move forward. But definitely troubling news there from Europe, and hopefully he's right. Hopefully the spread is slow enough and the vaccine deployment is fast enough that this latest version does not mutate in a way that spreads the virus all over again.
Yeah, and it's great news, I think, for New Mexico, the Moderna vaccine, because the Pfizer vaccine requires a lot of very high level of refrigeration. It requires very expensive freezers. You can use dry ice to keep it for a while. But, as we know, there's a lot of rural areas of New Mexico and a lot of places that don't have these $10,000 freezer units to keep the vaccine, at the temperature it needs to be before it's given. So I think that that's a good option for at least the rural parts of New Mexico and, other rural parts of across the country and across the world. Urban areas, I think either one would do fine. The Pfizer one
Yep.
would do fine. There's enough freezer refrigeration facilities to do what needs to be done in urban areas.
And it is worth noting that there was an issue in New Mexico. I haven't heard of any other instances of this happening around the country or world, but in true New Mexico fashion, 75 doses of the vaccine headed for Clayton, New Mexico. Their hospital up there had to be destroyed. It sounded like there was an issue with the measuring unit. It's kind of like the check engine light on your car goes a different color, and people are trying to take it to the mechanic and figure out what's wrong. And the issue was the check engine light. That's kind of the same impression as I gather from why they had to, destroy these 75 doses of the virus. But
Yeah, it could
obviously
be to
that's not
monitor as much as the
right.
fact that it was destroyed, but they couldn't take the chance.
Yeah, and that's definitely not news you want to hear, because those are 75 people who presumably, it could be life or death for at least some of those folks in terms of getting that virus taken so they can avoid having to suffer the effects of COVID-19. Now, again, news coming fast and furious. On Monday, the U.S. Congress has struck a deal. So, as of Monday, Congress has struck a deal on a COVID-19 stimulus plan. $600 checks heading to each of us, $300 bonus for federal unemployment benefits. So, if you remember early on, people were getting extra unemployment as part of the CARES Act. So, that is one of the aspects of this law. I think a lot of folks were expecting $1,200 checks made out to individuals, but that went by the wayside. The entire package is $900 billion. So, yet
Almost a trillion.
yeah, just a drop in the bucket there. Just a few more dollars added on to the debt, and there's a lot of different aspects to this particular uh, you know bill, and a lot of it is proverbial sausage factory stuff, money that you think, how the heck did this get into the package? Uh, Money going to foreign countries and foreign governments. You know, I'm seeing on Twitter $130 million to Nepal, $135 million to Burma, $85.5 to Cambodia, $700 million to Sudan. Just money spread out all over the place. And the Rio Grande Foundation, our view has never been that we really want more federal stimulus. We want governors to reopen their economies, people to still take precautions where necessary, but having large swaths of your entire economy closed to business is, what we're talking about. 10 months now, virtually, and looking like a year or more. It's just unsustainable. And $900 billion, another stimulus package. Certainly there's a lot of people who are banking on that money coming in, and it's hard to feel anything but sympathetic for them. However, uh, all of these debt chickens are going to have to come home to roost at some point in the federal government, and we're just digging a big, big hole up there in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and then the other thing is as you allude to, there's just a lot of pork in here. These programs are very inexact, and without a doubt, there are people out there that desperately need money. They're prohibited from working. And unemployment benefits for most people is certainly not as good as gainful employment. And then there's a lot of money going to people, if it's going to be like the first round of stimulus, who probably didn't need it, didn't deserve it, but they certainly will take it and they certainly will spend it. And so that's the issue with these sort of things. But the key is this is in the books. So it has been written, so it will be spent, and hopefully, as much of it as possible, a high percentage will go to the people who really do need, who really are suffering. And as you said, what would happen if we were to take a more rational approach to opening back up the economy, still with some safeguards in place? What would that do by comparison? Well, I think we have a relatively good natural experiment going. The states that are the most closed down have tended to not fare overall better than those that have that are more open in their economies when it comes to the spread of the coronavirus and COVID-19. But one thing that's absolutely sure is those states that are closed down, they have higher levels of unemployment. They have a lot more problems because of that. So maybe, when we're considering the quote data and science that is supposedly driven our response in our state and our nation, that we'll take that into account as well.
Yeah, and actually, the November 2020 unemployment data for individual states came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Uh, there are some states where that rate is incredibly low, whether you're talking about normal times or here in the pandemic. Some of the lowest level states in terms of unemployment, Nebraska and Vermont, share the top slot at 3.1% unemployment. Just
We
astonishing.
would take that in New Mexico on our biggest economic expansion ever. That's an impressively low rate of
Yeah,
unemployment.
that would be spectacular at any time for us here. South Dakota, of course, notably really open compared to other states. Kristi Noem, the governor there, uh, has evolved into a bit of a rock star on the conservative side of the spectrum. 3.5% unemployment, still something we would take right here in New Mexico. Iowa, 3.6, New Hampshire, 3.8, and Utah at 4.3%, which is not too shabby. Now, New Mexico has amazingly, with all of these lockdowns and everything this governor's doing, it's astonishing to me that our unemployment rate is as good as 7.5%, which is what we have in November. We are actually out of the 10 worst states. We are at 40th. There are 10 states that have higher unemployment rates than we do. Uh, apparently, New Jersey, 10.2, and Nevada 10.1. Also, Hawaii in the double digit uh, unemployment rate at 10.1. So those are the three worst states from an unemployment perspective, and that's normally Nevada is one of those states that's just kicking butt and taking names, but when your entire business as a state, basically, they've got some mining, they've got a few other things, but
It's tourism
it's tourism
driven.
entertainment, and
Yeah.
when you've got your main employers shut down like that, that is going to really kill you. A couple other notes about the stimulus bill as negotiated. Uh, Paid sick leave, which has been an issue here in Albuquerque, will likely be an issue in the upcoming legislative session. The federal stimulus plan provides a tax credit to support employers offering paid sick leave, a novel approach where it's not being put all on the backs of the businesses. You're actually getting a tax credit for paid sick leave. And that is to supplement or kind of carry on the family's first paid sick leave that was put into the CARES Act. And so another, at least innovative approach to providing paid sick leave. Uh, Eviction moratoriums. This is just crazy stuff. We haven't really talked about it, but the idea that the federal government mandates that landlords not kick people out who aren't paying their rent. That is a astonishing shifting of significant economic challenge onto the backs of landlords. But landlords are not the most sympathetic people in the world. So uh, that is one other aspect of this law. And, this is the kind of legislation that we'll be going through for weeks and months on end and picking out the flaws and things that go well or poorly. But it is very kind of noteworthy because we've seen months and months of debate and discussion about the next round of economic stimulus, and it does look like finally that is going to pass in Washington, D.C. And uh, I know that there's been a lot of complaints from what I've seen on social media all afternoon from different groups and members of Congress that the bill was negotiated behind closed doors and that they haven't even had the opportunity to look at it and read it before they're going to be expected to vote on it. But that is just the way Congress works these days, and it is very unfortunate.
Yes. So, yeah, I'm sure just like in other things, there were certain people that had to vote for it to see what was in there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And just a thought when it comes to follow up on eviction prohibitions, I would just think based on the economics that I've seen and studied, that's probably going to have an impact on the supply of housing.
Hmm.
You know, it's probably going to be right there with along with rent control. And you know, there was somebody, and Paul, I remember the quotes. You always remember who said them. Not putting the pressure on you, but you know, there was the statement about rent control, likening it basically can destroy a city as almost as more effectively than war. Well, you know, you put enough restrictions on in terms of what you can do with regard to evictions when that happens, or allowing the market for housing to function. And you could get a lot less housing that you want, which would make the price go up a whole lot. And, you know, again, I do not in any way want to sound like I'm not sympathetic to the issues of people who are struggling out there. But again, how about letting them work and keeping their jobs? And you would need a whole lot less of this craziness. And again, I think most of it has been shown that it can be done without very different rates of COVID infection from the states that are locked down versus the states that are not.
Yeah, I don't know who said that quote. The name Gunnar Myrdal, an architect of Sweden's welfare state, might have been the individual that said that. One of those quotes that is widely cited and not necessarily attributable, kind of like a Mark Twain quote. You got to really
Yeah.
check out those Mark Twain quotes. Well, there's a notable figure here in Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, particularly, who is being quoted a little bit these days. And he is one Sheriff Manny Gonzalez, who made some waves recently this week when he said he will not enforce, quote, unconstitutional laws under the state's COVID response. Now, this is very interesting for a variety of reasons because Manny Gonzalez, Sheriff Gonzalez, has been widely considered as a possible mayoral candidate running against Tim Keller. And that certainly puts him not as in strong of opposition to the mayor as on a practical
Mhm.
policy sense, because the city has been somewhat agnostic, if you will, about enforcing the governor's orders. In fact, there was just a ordinance considered at city council, rejected by city council, that would have dramatically increased penalties for people who disregard the governor's lockdown orders and various other aspects of that. What I think is most interesting here is the rhetoric and the oppositional stance here of the sheriff. You know, before I hand it over to you, Wally, we know from following, policing and the way policing works, and especially sheriffs have more leeway than chiefs of police in major cities. Chiefs of police have bosses that they answer to, specifically the mayor and the city council, where they don't necessarily have the freedom to assign or increase the emphasis on certain issues and decrease the emphasis on other issues that they want their officers to report. Sheriffs are elected directly by the people, and they are answerable directly to the people. And the fact that Manny Gonzalez seems to have higher aspirations than even Bernalillo County Sheriff, he may be putting himself out there as kind of the more nuanced public official relating to COVID-19, and kind of taking a more constitutional approach to enforcing those issues, which could set up a really interesting race for mayor. Now that we're not going to get that far down the path here, but certainly Manny Gonzalez is taking a different approach than whether it's Mayor Keller or certainly Michelle Lujan Grisham.
Yeah, there's no question about that. That sheriffs in New Mexico have taken positions that are counter to either uh, things of the federal government, things of state government. They've shown a lot of independence over the years, and I don't think that this is a surprising one to have a sheriff, but the fact to have democratic a Democrat sheriff in Bernalillo County that's basically a pretty strong Democratic stronghold in the state of New Mexico is definitely going out there, and so I think people have some things to talk about. The other thing is that they say that a year is forever in politics, and even a month can be forever. So when we go to vote in just under 2 years again, there will be a lot of things that will happen between now and then, and if the policies that are currently being put forth, they could be seen as more genius than ever, and the governor is the biggest hero in the history of the state, or it's probably as likely, maybe more likely, to be a lot of frustration with those policies, and possibly give the sheriff a leg up in whatever higher political office he might be seeking at that time.
So just to be clear, the next mayoral election is in November of 2021. So that's
Yeah, 1 year. Yeah,
under a
one.
year.
Okay,
Yeah,
no, you're right. So if he's going something at the state level, it's 2 years. But
right.
yeah, he has 1 year. And my sense is, and you tell me, it doesn't seem like you know the mayor has his town halls on COVID, but it never seems like much is said one way or the other, that they've come out very strong. I'm not sure he's taken as much of a nuanced as much as a, hey, I'm paying attention, but nothing. There's not much different in the city of Albuquerque than any of the statewide, and I think that this is definitely saying maybe we ought to be doing things different in Bernalillo County than we're doing statewide.
Yeah, and all of this gets very complicated, both the politics as well as the enforcement itself. And let's talk about the politics briefly, first and foremost. Yes, he could, Manny Gonzalez, run for a higher office. It would be a primary election for, Democrat, running for governor. And that's, I'm not convinced his name ID at this point in the equation is high enough to run for governor of the state of New Mexico. And unless he changed parties, he would be running as a Democrat against Michelle Lujan Grisham, which I think Democrats, by and large, if you polled them, they would be pretty happy with the governor's rules and diktats, and that would be a challenging election for Gonzalez. So
Yeah, and there's not a history of that working out well for
right,
anyone anywhere, not just New Mexico,
right.
challenging a sitting governor or any elected official in the primary.
Yeah, and on the other hand, COVID will be very fresh in people's minds even in November of next year. We don't know exactly what the playing field will look like, but you have to obviously are going to really start the ball rolling pretty quickly here for an election that takes place next November. Uh, Mayor Keller, quite honestly, he has done the bare minimum, if you will, in enforcing things on from the governor's perspective. He hasn't been an enthusiastic supporter necessarily, as far as I've seen. Really, though, it just highlights the challenge of as being as aggressive as politicians want to in America. And this isn't to get too philosophical into this whole situation, but European countries and most other foreign countries have much more unified governments. They have a national police force that's under the control of their national government. The United States really doesn't have many of those mechanisms. I mean, it's like the Department of Interior police are not going to go around enforcing COVID-19. You're relying on city governments, city police forces, state police forces under the control of the governor, and that they are a big factor here in New Mexico. But the sheriff has an independent power structure. So you have all of these different people and entities that are in conflict. So I don't think the mayor, you know, even if it was a Republican mayor of Albuquerque, say R.J. Berry with a spine, if he were to really take issue with what the governor uh, said, like how much could he really do to oppose her publicly and enforcing these laws? Mayors have different prerogatives, priorities, and different constraints on their power. Sheriffs, as we've seen on the gun control issue here in the state and other high profile issues, sheriffs have a lot more freedom to put themselves up in opposition to what's going on, especially at the state level. So, uh, not that I'm going to defend Mayor Keller in a lot of respects, but I think Mayor Keller has been reasonably nuanced in his approach to the issues where he has been able to. But this is obviously a political dynamic here where Manny Gonzalez is kind of taking the more populist approach and putting himself directly in opposition to the governor and presumably kind of the Democratic Party establishment of the state.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And just to follow up on your thought about Mayor Keller's performance, at a I would say very complimentary to him. At least he hasn't taken the governor's policies and then made them even more draconian and worse.
Exactly.
You look a couple states over in California, you have the governor Newsom that's doing some really wild and crazy things. And then you have the mayor of Los Angeles that's taking those and running with them and making them twice as bad. In Albuquerque, I don't think that we're seeing that sort of approach, and I would I would personally say good job by Mayor Keller doing that. And again, whether it's for effectiveness, philosophic, or just politics, um, the impact has been to at least not make Albuquerque suffer worse than we would have otherwise. So
Yeah. And of course, the mayor has other major issues he needs to be focused on, including crime issues, which are very important. Of course, if Manny Gonzalez were to run against the mayor, he could really have a field day with some of the criminal justice issues in the city of Albuquerque. Uh, of course, Manny Gonzalez took a position of at least working with the Trump administration, whereas Keller was much more high-handed and saying, we don't need this help, get out of here, that kind of thing. So, very interesting dynamics happening there in that both politically and from a enforcement perspective when it comes to COVID-19. Now, I'm sure a lot of people probably thought we were going to lead off the entire shebang this week with the next story, but that just indicates how we have a target rich environment, to quote Top Gun. There's so much going on in New Mexico politics. Deb Haaland, Congresswoman Haaland, has been named by President Biden, President elect Biden, to head Interior, Secretary of Interior. Now, before we do dive into Deb Haaland, her record, and even contrasting it a little bit with Michelle Lujan Grisham, who was obviously offered that role before Deb Haaland. Apparently, he had a fixation, Biden did, on having a woman from New Mexico head up Interior because it was well publicized that he offered it to Lujan Grisham. She turned him down, and then he went to Deb Haaland. Uh, so Interior does control lands across our nation, including Native American lands. And she would be the first, I believe, Native American, certainly Native American female, to head up the Department of the Interior. I am not a big fan of kind of the identity politics of the Democratic Party coalition in this country. I think that we should judge people generally based on their merits, not on what their DNA says about them. That being said, in the case of Native Americans and the Interior Department, I certainly sympathize with them in a way I might not sympathize with every Hispanic female nominee for every other department or whoever, whatever boxes Biden's trying to check. There is something somewhat unique about having a Native American involved in the Department of the Interior as managing that agency.
yeah, no question about it. Because when you look at the agencies that are there, the Bureau of Land Management, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the National Park Service are, in my mind, the big three. There are several others, but all of those agencies are, have a lot to do with New Mexico. And also, in the case of Indian Affairs and certainly Bureau of Land Management, are huge parts of our population are impacted by what those policies are, whether it's folks in the Four Corners regions or Southeast New Mexico. What rules do they operate under oil and gas? And, you don't have to look at the history, whether it be the ancient history or the recent history of the Bureau of Indian Affairs to see that there's an agency that certainly has some issues, and to argue that that would be hitting on all cylinders and operating effectively and efficiently would just be, I think, a statement too far for anybody but the most ardent supporter of government. And so I think that yes, she could have some unique perspective on that. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, to name one, just some native colleagues of mine that some live on, some live off the reservation. There's a don't make the assumption that there's a uniform approach to what people think of the Bureau. There's some folks that are very think very highly of it, and there's some that really are frustrated and disgusted by it. So there's a lot of issues to be had there, and a lot of them will impact New Mexicans disproportionately. And so I think that's why obviously you don't want to pick someone to manage interior that doesn't have as much uh, tie to what public land is and what it means, but a lot of policy at put into play, and then what changes will come. That's the real big question.
Yeah, and of course, at the Rio Grande Foundation, we do focus on those public policy issues, and we definitely have some very serious concerns about Deb Haaland. But really quickly, before we go into those, Department of the Interior, according to its website, employs some 70,000 people, including scientists and resource management professionals in 9 technical bureaus: Indian Affairs, Indian Education, Bureau of Land Management, Ocean Energy Management, Bureau of Reclamation. They're in charge of a lot of the dams and kind of Western water projects. Those are important issues here in New Mexico as well. Safety and Environmental Enforcement, Trust Funds Administration, National Park Service. So that's kind of the third of those crown jewels you're mentioning. Surface Mining, Reclamation and Enforcement, Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Geological Survey. Now, having one person with expertise in all of those is probably impossible. However, we're going to talk a little bit about Deb Haaland's track record and some of the issues. But it is worth noting, now, I think you and I, and we talked about this at the time, that we were somewhat, enthusiastic about Michelle Lujan Grisham possibly being in Washington, D.C., a long, long way from New Mexico, where she couldn't impose her draconian restrictions on people. Little did I anticipate that I would actually want Deb Haaland to be Secretary of Interior, because she would actually be considerably better on policy than the person Biden ultimately chose. And over at heirsofenchantment.com, I took a cursory look, but detailed look at the track records of these two women. Of course, Lujan Grisham, our governor, who turned down the position, and Deb Haaland, who has accepted, although she has to be confirmed first. Haaland told the Guardian newspaper, a British newspaper, "I am wholeheartedly against fracking and drilling on public lands." She's a staunch supporter of the Green New Deal. And those are very significant issues. On the other hand, Lujan Grisham, while in Congress, voted for exports of crude oil, which has really been one of the great policy successes our federal government's embarked upon in the last uh, 5 years at least, but possibly decade. Now, Lujan Grisham has stated publicly that she would like to transition New Mexico away from fossil fuels. However, and she did sign the Energy Transition Act, which some have called the New Mexico mini Green New Deal. But Michelle Lujan Grisham has also stated that she would ask for a waiver for New Mexico when it comes to fracking on federal lands. And that's predominantly under the Bureau of Land Management here in New Mexico. But as we'll discuss shortly, that is a huge economic area impact for New Mexico. If somehow fracking were to actually be banned on BLM lands or all federal lands in New Mexico, that would be a true killer for our state's economy.
Yeah, no question about that. And then when it comes to policies like hydraulic fracturing on public lands, how much do the personal beliefs of the, I guess you call her, what do you call the secretary before the confirmed secretary elect or proposed secretary? How much does she really get to decide those high level policy issues relative to the president? Because one thing about it is, I have seen uh, Biden tends to have moderated his positions on things, including hydraulic fracturing. Now, just you
Well,
pick.
hold on, Wally. He moderated from a outright nationwide ban to a federal lands ban,
Okay,
which is
yeah.
moderation, but that's actually the killer for New Mexico.
Oh no, no question, no question about that. I'm just saying that uh, it's one of those things. Things get said in political campaigns that sometimes are not followed through in. I'm not saying that they're not going to do it, and if they do it, make no mistake, it's a disaster for New Mexico economically. Let me just say, I don't want to equivocate in any way, shape, or
Fair enough.
form. But will they do that? And when they get there and the time comes to make these hard calls and what it would mean to the state of New Mexico and the politics that would be in play, is this the sort of thing where they do basically some what we say, optically pleasing policy changes by while still allowing the industry to go on forward, or do they do, you know what Deb Haaland has said, no more fracking on public land? Roughly 2/3 of the oil and gas are on public land in New Mexico. What does that mean for existing leases? Does that mean just for new leases, or does it mean for existing leases? What does all that mean? And then it could make you know the economics of that, if they were to go that way, that could make COVID-19 look relatively inconsequential to the state of New Mexico, as the impact of that could cascade through the economy for years and decades to come. So
Absolutely, yeah. And we're going to talk about the numbers on that because there's been a lot of studies on that. But I do want to address Deb Haaland's, if you will, interesting perspectives on some big issues. Uh, there was a article in the Los Alamos Monitor in which she, when she was newly elected in Congress, representing here in Albuquerque, Congressional District 1, she in August 2019, and this is all posted at airsoфenchantment.com. She stated uh, that she gave a speech one time, and this is directly quoting from her, where I said, climate change in this country started when the Europeans got here and they started slaughtering the buffalo. 1,000 a day, she said. The buffalo almost went extinct, blah, blah, blah. So essentially, and again, I'm not putting words in her mouth. This is directly quoting her in a newspaper article from August 2019. So it's also not ancient history here. Uh, you know, even if you talk just about man made climate change, which she didn't say, because of course, environmentalists love to conflate climate change and that's natural. And I've been to the Natural History Museum down in Albuquerque with my kids dozens and dozens of times. You can go and look at, New Mexico was underwater. There was a gigantic lake in this area.
and
Uh,
in more recent times, there were glaciers in New Mexico, which there aren't a whole lot of glaciers and haven't been for many hundreds of years.
and then you
So
get into human caused issues, and it's pretty widely known that Native Americans were responsible for the extinction of things like the woolly mammoth and other large charismatic beasts that used to roam the North American continent. Uh, you know, I'm not going to go into all those details, but no doubt the destruction of the bison, I always call them bison, on the North American continent was one of the, uh, outside of the slavery issue and what actually happened to Native Americans, was one of the most boneheaded things that this country did in the early days of, being a country, or even before being a country. And really the idea that you just go in and relentlessly slaughter those animals for no reason was nothing short of tragic. So I'm not questioning her in saying that that was a tragic thing that was done, but is that really where you see climate change beginning? Because Native Americans had a very big impact on the climate as well. Maybe not to that extent, but Native Americans, managed the land through fires and all kinds of other things that they did. Clearly, history did not begin. This did not all change for the worse when the white man showed up, which is, I think, really what she's getting at here in making a statement. So it's just, she is an activist. She has always taken the position of an activist, including as a member of Congress, somebody who, while not part of the quote unquote squad, the AOC group in Congress of the extreme left, she's definitely a fellow traveler with those kinds of folks. And I really think that Republicans in the Senate are going to have a field day with her lack of scientific understanding and qualifications relating to some of the very complex issues at Interior.
Yeah, because a couple of issues, and I do this all the time, and you don't need to answer this. This is a rhetorical question, whether you know or not. But who's the current Secretary of Interior? I've asked that a lot. No one knows that I've asked, and
It was Zinke, and he
yeah,
left.
he's gone. So people don't know who that is. And your point about she's been an activist through her political career. Well, now she's going to be an administrator. And so, what does she bring into that role? And then how much of that activism is she allowed to politically bring over? And will that serve her well? And as you said, will she be confirmed? Because they're, depending on who's in the Senate and how that process worked, it's not a foregone conclusion that everyone that's nominated to be a cabinet member is confirmed by the Senate and seated as a secretary sitting on the cabinet.
And maybe next week we'll get into a few of the folks that have already thrown their proverbial hats in the ring. Certainly, several Democrats have already done so, but I don't have my list in front of me. And Wally, we've got a lot to still talk about here in the waning minutes of this particular podcast. Uh, Real quickly, and I posted this as part of one of the Errors of Enchantment pieces I wrote on Deb Haaland, a study by Dr. Timothy Considine at the University of Wyoming noted that the state would lose on average $946 million per year in oil and gas tax revenue in the first 5 years. So every year for 5 years, you'd lose just under $1 billion to the state under a lease moratorium. That would be 1.2 billion per year in tax revenue in the first 5 years under a outright drilling ban. So that would be a huge. The magnitude of that policy and its impacts on New Mexico would be extraordinary and extraordinarily harmful. And it's just something that we will see. If she's confirmed, what happens there, and then whether Biden will actually follow her off that proverbial cliff from a public policy perspective. Now, Wally, believe it or not, we still have even more to discuss important public policy issues. PFM Consultants released a report on New Mexico tax policy. Now, this is no doubt a left-wing hit job in terms of looking at New Mexico's tax code. And the media dutifully reported, all the things that we should be raising taxes on. That doesn't mean there weren't some decent aspects of this uh, of this consultant's report, but this is clearly designed to set the table for higher taxes in the state of New Mexico. Again, detailed at Heirs of Enchantment. Uh, we put two posts up. One includes some charts showing how New Mexico lags the region, uh, states surrounding it in average private annual private income growth from 2009 to 2018. We lag all of our neighbors. We have 0.7% during that time period, so 0.7% growth a year, and it's compounding, of course. Utah is at 3%. They led the way, but Colorado and Utah are at 2.3 and 2.2%. So we're just getting crushed in that area. We have more significant poverty issues than any other state surrounding us. And when it comes to our median incomes, we lag dramatically. The median household income for 2018, according to the PFM report, which is available online. You can find it, although you can find it more easily through the link on our blog, heirsofenchantment.com, 71,953. So essentially, the median household in Colorado is making just under $72,000. In New Mexico, the median household income, 47,170.
That's a pretty substantial difference, is it
Yes,
not? Wow.
quite substantial.
Yes.
Utah 71,414. Wyoming's they included Wyoming and Alaska because they're both energy dependent western states. Uh, Arizona's 59,246. Oklahoma, interestingly enough, comes closest to New Mexico at 51,924. But still, you're talking close to $5,000 more than New Mexico, and Oklahoma is a very cost efficient, cost effective, affordable state to live in. Now, so that's some useful information from that report. Alas, the report includes numerous proposals to raise taxes, higher marginal rates on personal income. They want to they recommend eliminating the capital gains tax, personal income tax exemption, which uh, you know the thing about capital gains taxes is that they're very sensitive to being increased dramatically. The functional nature of corporate of capital gains taxes is that people can easily adjust their behavior to not pay those taxes, and the people who pay capital gains taxes are very sensitive to higher tax rates. That's why at the federal and state level, capital gains taxes tend to be lower and have gotten lower over the years because people want to be competitive. It's not, see, New Mexico politicians look at this through the more moral and the money through the state perspective. They don't seem to care whether they'll actually achieve their goals of getting more money, that people would actually leave for these policies. Reinstitute the estate tax, increase the gas tax, tax medical marijuana, of course. We're okay with that to an extent. Broaden the GRT, gross receipts tax, to include food and give lower income level taxpayers some kind of credit against that, although they do recommend not raising GRT rates. Uh, Expand the excise taxes for new goods, including vapor products, and they even contemplate a carbon tax. So, quite the array of big tax, big spending policies there, Wally, and I'll hand it over to you.
Yes. Something will be taxed in New Mexico. We know that. Um, I am not a big fan of the income tax for the simple reason that in New Mexico, you can raise the income tax rate a lot and not get very much income and really discourage a lot of economic activity, or much how we're seeing in places like California and Illinois and New York State. You can encourage businesses to move to Texas by raising the income tax rates a lot, but not really gain much revenue. The other factor about, when we took gross receipts tax off of food, it was done in such a way that really made that system far worse. And we've raised rates, and with the pancaking or the layering of gross receipts tax, it's a huge detriment to capital formation and new businesses, startup businesses in New Mexico. So I would hope they do something about that. And boy, do I have, pardon the pun, Paul, I have high hopes for marijuana bringing in a lot of taxes. But I have a feeling that compared to things like oil and gas and some of the challenge we're facing on a good day, it's going to be just a minor uh, revenue enhancer. And over time, if it's like other states, we're going to have a lot of cost over time that creep in from all the problems that come. So I'm not sure that that is the panacea, but anything that would broaden out gross receipts tax and take away some of the multi-layer, I think could help the state. And then the others are just, it's what is it, Willie Sutton? Why do you rob the banks? Because that's where the money is. That's what they're looking at. They're saying, why a gas tax? Because people use gasoline, and we know we can tax it. If we raise income taxes, we won't raise that much revenue. A small gas tax could raise a lot of revenue. We'll talk about being more efficient in government, but probably not in this coming legislative session. That's my guess, that we're going to talk all keep government the same and keep spending the same. And if it takes taxes to do it, that's the path that this is laying on. And I'm not sure that it's inaccurate at this point. So
Yeah, and raising significant tax revenues now would be the height of irresponsibility, but that's kind of the mentality that the people have elected in this state. It's just going to further undermine our prospects for economic growth, economic diversification, all the things that they claim to want in Santa Fe, but don't actually have the guts to get there. And that's a huge problem. Now, there are a couple of reasonable, good points they made. One, and this is directly from the PFM consulting report, also on Heirs of Enchantment. The GRT raises equity concerns related to horizontal equity. Now, when the left talks about equity, they always talk about high and low income level folks, but they don't often discuss horizontal equity. That means businesses of different sizes having to pay wildly disparate rates of gross receipts tax.
And I'm one of those small businesses
Yes.
that has to pay because, and you say, why is that? The reason you have to is smaller businesses tend to use more contractors for
Right.
major inputs, and they pay gross receipts tax on it. So,
Well, and I will quote directly, smaller firms may have to absorb the GRT related to services it purchases if the GRT is passed along to them by the service provider, which it always is, such as accounting, legal, or marketing, or podcast creation or consulting of other kinds. Larger firms can bring those services in-house and avoid taxation of those business-to-business transactions. So that is directly quoting from the PFM report. And then they have this
to which
gem.
I say amen.
Yes. And then they have this gem at the end, which, of course, the media all dutifully ignored. Nearly every independent study of state film tax credits across the country has determined that the credits do not create a positive return on investment. Then they go into Georgia and numerous other states that have some form of film subsidies and looking at some of the studies. But the money quote is any time you take an honest look at state film subsidies, and of course we talked about Netflix recently on the podcast and how that is a real boondoggle. PFM, which this report is definitely from the left-wing perspective, not looking at economic growth, not considering how you manage the tax code for maximized economic opportunity for New Mexicans. And they criticize the 2003 Richardson tax cuts on personal income and capital gains. I think it's an open question as to how successful or not successful those were. First and foremost, you're not doing tax policy in a vacuum. You are raising other taxes, dramatically increasing spending. Things I think were going pretty darn well in the New Mexico economy, and those tax cuts were not costing much in the way of revenue. We're actually seeing revenue increase nonetheless during that time period. But then you had the economic crisis of 2008 hit, and to be fair, it would be pretty honest to say that New Mexico's economy hasn't really recovered uh, in any significant way since 2008, 2009. Since that economic crisis, oil and gas sector definitely had a few good years recently, but we really have not recovered our state economy to the levels that we were back in 2008, 2009. So, uh, yeah, Wally, just a jam-packed week of all kinds of stuff, and I'm leaving a few things on the cutting room floor for next week. So we'll talk a year in review and take us home in 2020.
Yeah, it's been a wild and crazy year, and hopefully that will cease to continue, and we're going to be having a boring session, but it doesn't look that way, at least for the next several months. So
Yeah, no doubt about it. While it's going to be another interesting year ahead of us. Thanks for listening to this week's show. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.